They said I was unstable, mentally incompetent, a drifter, a woman with no husband, no real career, no direction. My father's voice filled the courtroom before I ever spoke a word. "She can't even look at you, Your Honor," he shouted, his face flushed red, the veins in his neck bulging like they were about to burst. "She lives alone in some tiny box of an apartment. No family. No stability. She doesn't understand money or responsibility or reality. She needs a conservator before she destroys what little she has left." He pointed at me like I was evidence. Like I was a problem to be solved. I sat perfectly still. Hands folded in my lap. Back straight. Breathing slow. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't give him the reaction he'd spent my entire life trying to pull out of me. Instead, I checked the time on my watch. 10:14 a.m. Right on schedule. Judge Alvarez watched him over the rim of her glasses, her expression calm, unreadable. She didn't interrupt. She let him keep talking. Let him keep digging. "Look at her," my father continued, pacing now. "She hasn't said a word. That's not strength, that's medication. That's an episode. This is what untreated instability looks like in women who think they're smarter than they are." The word women landed heavier than anything else. Because I'd heard this my whole life. Too emotional. Too quiet. Too ambitious. Too alone. I felt the familiar pressure in my chest. The old instinct to explain myself, to prove I wasn't broken. But I crushed it down. Silence was safer. Silence had kept me alive this long. Judge Alvarez finally leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the room. "You really don't know who she is, do you?" The air changed. My father laughed, a short, confident laugh, like he'd already won. At the table beside him, his attorney froze mid-scroll, staring at the document the bailiff had just placed in front of him. The color drained from his face. Fast. So fast I thought he might be sick. I didn't look at either of them. I watched dust float through a beam of sunlight slicing across the courtroom, and without meaning to, my mind slipped backward, 4 months earlier to Christmas Eve. We were sitting at the long dining table in my father's house in Austin. The house I quietly paid the mortgage on. He didn't know that part. I handed him my new business card. He laughed. Actually laughed. "A consultant?" he sneered, swirling expensive bourbon in his glass. "Is that what we're calling unemployment now? It's cute. A little hobby, sweetheart." Everyone at the table went quiet. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. That familiar burn of being the disappointment. The daughter who never did things the right way. No husband. No kids. No obedience. But sitting in that courtroom now, the memory didn't hurt. It fueled me. Because while he was mocking my pretend job over roast beef and wine, my firm had just secured a $14 million federal contract auditing a corrupt medical supply chain. He saw a failure. I saw the managing partner of a forensic accounting firm designed to follow money that didn't want to be found. No. The money I was following was his. "She's catatonic," my father shouted, snapping me back to the present. "Look at her posture. That blank stare. She's clearly unwell. I demand immediate conservatorship." I adjusted my cuff, feeling the cool steel of my watch against my skin. Let him talk. Let him describe me the way he always had. Fragile, irresponsible, incapable. If I spoke now, I'd look defensive. Emotional. Exactly what he wanted. Silence made him look unstable. Silence let him destroy himself. He moved on to my living situation next. "She lives in some rundown rental downtown," he scoffed. "Won't let family visit. Probably ashamed. Probably filthy." I almost smiled. He was talking about the Calderon. He was right about one thing. I didn't let him visit. But everything else was wrong. I didn't rent there. I owned the building. The entire building. Including the office space his firm was leasing on the 3rd floor. My father, so proud of being sharp, so convinced he controlled everything, had never realized his landlord's signature on those eviction notices last quarter was mine. Across the aisle, his attorney was sweating now. Frantically scrolling. Because he wasn't reading my grandmother's asset summary. He was reading mine. I wasn't here for an inheritance. I didn't need one. I was here because my father tried to take my freedom. Tried to use the legal system to erase me. And now the unstable daughter he'd dismissed for decades? She was the one holding the leverage. I met Judge Alvarez's eyes. She gave the smallest nod. The trap was set. And all we had to do now was let him keep talking. My father fed off the silence like oxygen. She lives alone, he continued, pacing again, louder now. No husband. No children. No one who can vouch for her stability. That kind of isolation is dangerous in women like her. Women like her. I folded my hands tighter in my lap. Alone wasn't the insult he thought it was. Alone meant uninterrupted. Alone meant focused. Alone meant I didn't have anyone whispering doubt into my ear while I worked. But he wasn't finished. No income. No real assets. No proof she's ever managed anything of value, he said, shaking his head like a disappointed patriarch. This silence? This isn't confidence. It's fear. She knows she's nothing without me. For the first time my jaw tightened. And my mind drifted again. Not to memories he controlled but to one he desperately wanted buried. A Tuesday afternoon 2 years earlier. I remembered the date because it was the same day I closed my first 7-figure audit. I was still on a video call when the knock came. Firm. Authoritative. Unavoidable. 2 police officers stood outside my door. One of them read my name off a clipboard. The other avoided eye contact. Ma'am, we have an involuntary psychiatric hold. A 5150. The words didn't hit immediately. I invited them inside. They looked around. At the clean apartment. At the organized files. At the open laptop on my desk. Federal agents clearly visible on the screen mid-call. The paperwork said I was delusional. Reckless. Burning through my inheritance on imaginary businesses. The signature at the bottom belonged to a physician I'd never met. But I knew his name. My father's golfing buddy. The plan was simple. Lock me up for 72 hours. File emergency motions. Seize control of my trust fund before I could object. Because what better way to silence a woman than to label her unstable? One officer finally cleared his throat. Ma'am, who are you speaking with? I turned the laptop slightly. Department of Defense Subcontracting Auditors, I said calmly. We're reviewing falsified medical procurement invoices. They left 10 minutes later. The report was flagged as malicious. I could have pressed charges. Could have ended everything right there. But I didn't. Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted resolution. And I wanted it permanent. The next morning I formed Atlas Advisory Group. Neutral name. Delaware registration. Nothing that traced back to me emotionally. Through Atlas I approached my father's bank. Quietly. Professionally. They were relieved to unload his debt. His firm was bleeding. Declining revenues. Bad accounting practices. I bought his loans. All of them. Then I injected $650,000 into his firm as a senior secured loan. Private capital. He didn't ask questions. Didn't investigate. He saw the money hit the account and assumed the universe finally acknowledged his brilliance. And what did he do with it? He didn't stabilize payroll. Didn't modernize systems. He bought a vintage slate gray Porsche. Drove it to Thanksgiving dinner like a crown. Carved the turkey. Raised his glass. Then looked straight at me. Maybe if you applied yourself, he said casually, you wouldn't be such a financial embarrassment. At your age still needing help. I smiled. Ate my potatoes. Because he didn't know the car was already mine. Every mile he drove depreciated an asset he didn't own. Back in the courtroom my father leaned into the podium again, confidence returning. We're wasting time, he said. My daughter has no income, no assets and no grasp on reality. This silence proves it. I finally looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't a monster. He was just a bad investment. And today I was closing the account. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. Thomas, stop. Please. My father brushed him off. Not now. I'm making my point. Judge Alvarez's voice dropped ice cold. You should listen to your counsel, Mr. Hale. She lifted a single document. According to this, she continued, the petitioner isn't just your daughter. She paused. She's your creditor. He laughed. My creditor? He shook his head. Your Honor, this is exactly what I mean. Delusions of grandeur. She can't even manage her own life. His attorney made a strangled sound. Thomas, he hissed, gripping his sleeve. Look at the seal. This is federal. My father yanked his arm free. I will not sit down while my daughter embarrasses this court. He turned back to the judge and pointed at me. Look at her clothes. Discount suit. Scuffed shoes. Does that look like success to you? I glanced down. The scuffs were from climbing through a warehouse window to verify inventory. I didn't replace them because I didn't need to perform wealth. Unlike him, I didn't wear my worth. She lives at the Calderon, he snapped, proud of what he thought was the final blow. That crumbling brick building downtown. Studio apartment. Probably rats in the walls. He was right about the rats. When I bought it, I fixed that. Unit 3C was just a mail drop. He thought I rented. He didn't know he was insulting his own landlord. He stood there chest heaving. Certain he'd won. Judge Alvarez slowly removed her glasses. The patience was gone. Mr. Hale, she said quietly, you have 10 seconds to sit down, or I will hold you in contempt so fast you won't understand what happened. His mouth opened. His attorney forced him into the chair. Good, the judge said. Now let's review the facts. She slid a single page across the polished wood. And let's start with the building you just insulted. The page slid across the polished wood like a guillotine. Judge Alvarez's voice was calm, precise. Mr. Hale, the Calderon Unit 3C is not just a mail drop. Miss Hale doesn't rent it. She owns the entire property. I let the words hang in the air, like smoke curling from a flame he didn't see coming. His face went blank. The room felt like it had contracted. Every breath heavier than the last. You could hear the tick of the clock above the judge's bench. Entire property? He finally croaked, voice unsteady. Yes, Judge Alvarez said, flipping another folder. Including the commercial suites your firm currently occupies. The third floor. Yours. He looked from the page to me, then back. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened, closed. Tried again. Impossible, he said. I landlord. Plus real estate. I pay rent to a company. Not her. I've never written a check to her personally. Yes, the judge said. Atlas Real Estate, Atlas Capital, Atlas Advisory Group. All owned and incorporated by Miss Hale. The documents you signed personally were cross-collateralized. Every office, every desk, every lease, secured under her name. I stayed silent. Controlled. I let the room absorb it. Let him swallow it whole. This was the moment. The pivot. The reversal of every story he'd told for decades. Thomas's laugh came out wet, choking, disbelief masking fury. Pie creditor? He spit the words like they were poison. This is fraud. She can't own a firm. Non-lawyers can't do this. She's delusional. Illegal. Dismiss this. Dismiss. Sit down. Judge Alvarez's tone was ice. Now. He flinched but obeyed. The judge turned to me, calm but cutting. Miss Hale, she said, please explain your role. I stood heels firm on the hardwood. My hands folded around the loan file, the weapon that had been waiting in plain sight. You're correct, Your Honor. I'm not a lawyer. I do not practice law. But I did something far more effective. I purchased the company's distressed debt. All loans, all credit lines, every obligation tying your firm to solvency. I extended $650,000 as a senior secured loan. He defaulted on it. Public disparagement of the guarantor, me, triggers immediate collateral seizure. That is what happened here. The company is solvent. He is not. The courtroom froze. Even the bailiff stopped moving. The weight of every word hung like lightning, crackling in the silence. Thomas's attorney leaned forward, panic spilling over. Your Honor, if you allow this, if assets are seized, the firm will collapse. I didn't blink. Calm was my ally. I accept the consequences, I said softly. If the firm fails, he assumes the debt personally. The balance is due. Enforcement requested immediately. My father's face drained of color. The confidence he carried like armor was gone. He opened his mouth, groped for words. I could almost see the panic spark behind his eyes. I don't have that money, he stammered. I know, I said almost gently. You have $11,000 in the bank and a maxed-out credit card. The rest is mine. Every eye in the room shifted between us. His attorney looked like he wanted to vanish. Judge Alvarez's gaze didn't waver. This is not personal, I continued, leaning slightly forward. It's business. You weaponized the law against me for 30 years. You tried to erase me. I am simply calling the account. My father's chest heaved. his face twisted into the kind of rage you only see when someone realizes the foundations they've built their life on are made of sand. Chapter 7, he barked, yanking out his phone. Automatic stay. Bankruptcy protects companies, not individuals. I slid the final page across the table. You signed personally. Cross-collateralized. Default transfers the debt to you. You didn't bankrupt the firm. You bankrupted yourself. Claims on your house, lake cabin, the Porsche pension, even your club membership. 24 hours to vacate. Commercial eviction effective immediately. The courtroom gasped. Silence descended. Dense, suffocating, complete. His attorney packed up. Left without a word. Thomas sank into his chair, hollow, small, broken, staring at what remained. I walked out without looking back. No gloating. No satisfaction. Just the quiet hum of freedom. That night I watched a locksmith change the office locks. The firm's nameplate dropped into the box. I didn't profit. Didn't need to. The money was the price of my freedom. At home I deleted his contact. Not blocked. Deleted. Silent. Gone. Sometimes you don't have to destroy a toxic family. Sometimes you just stop funding it. And that is all it ever took. I walked home that evening, heels clicking softly against the city streets. The air was cold, but it didn't bother me. Cold never had power over me. Only control, planning, and patience did. The Calderon building rose behind me, a familiar silhouette against the dying light. My home. My office. My fortress. For years he had tried to make me small, invisible, incapable. Tonight I finally felt the weight of that invisibility lift. I didn't gloat. Not even in my mind. I didn't need to. Revenge had never been about humiliation. It had always been about freedom. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old books, the scent of a life I had carefully built, piece by piece, while he was too busy being proud of himself to notice. I sank into my couch, legs crossed, and let my mind drift. To my first 7-figure audit. To the 2 police officers who had shown up at my door trying to protect me. To the $650,000 I'd injected into his firm, disguised as generosity, when really it was the seed of his undoing. And finally to the courtroom. The way he had stood there, chest puffed, arrogance dripping from every word. The way he had laughed at my hobby. The way he had never once imagined that the quiet, obedient daughter he thought he knew could orchestrate her own justice. I closed my eyes and saw him there. Shaking. Red-faced. Small. Hollow. A man who had built a life on appearances, not reality. And for once he was powerless. Freedom didn't feel like fire or fireworks. It felt like silence. I poured myself a glass of wine, a ritual I allowed only in private, and let the red liquid slide down my throat. Calm. Collected. Untouchable. I thought about all the women who are underestimated, dismissed, told they aren't ready, aren't capable, aren't enough. How easily the world writes off ambition in a woman as instability. How quickly the people who claim to love you turn on the very ambition that makes you real. And then I smiled. Because I was no one's failure. I had orchestrated the entire scenario with patience, precision, and foresight. Every insult, every accusation, every attempt to erase me only tightened the noose he didn't realize I was weaving. I opened my laptop, the same one that had been evidence of my competence in those long, invisible years. Every contract, every audit, every ledger perfectly in place. Atlas Advisory, Atlas Capital, Atlas Real Estate. They weren't just companies. They were proof. Proof that a woman underestimated could quietly build an empire while the world was busy doubting her. Sometimes I think the hardest part wasn't taking back control. It was watching him believe he still had it. The tension in his chest, the disbelief in his eyes. Those were the moments of poetic justice I couldn't orchestrate no matter how clever. They happened naturally. And as I sat there, glass in hand, I realized something else. Power isn't about crushing someone. It's about reclaiming what was yours all along. I had paid my father's mortgage without him knowing. I had saved his firm from collapse without him ever acknowledging it. I had invested in his legacy while he only invested in appearances. And now, after decades of being dismissed, I held it all. Legally. Financially. Morally. The weight of it was strange. Heavy, yes, but not burdensome. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Because I had never wanted to humiliate him. I had wanted to survive. To be seen. to be recognized as more than just the unstable daughter. The law had been his weapon. Logic had been his shield. But patience, calm, measured, unshakable patience, was mine. And it had won. I set my glass down and walked to the window. The city lights blinked, distant, steady, indifferent. The chaos he had tried to impose on my life had evaporated. And somewhere deep inside I knew this was only the beginning. Freedom isn't an event. It's a state of mind. It's quiet. It's calculated. It's untouchable. I smiled again, this time at no one. Not at him. Not at the judge. Not even at the world that had doubted me. Because I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's silent. And it lasts forever. The night after the courtroom I didn't sleep much. Not because of fear or regret. Because for the first time in my life I didn't have to. I replayed everything in my mind. The laughter he had thought meant victory. The confident sneer that had masked insecurity. The way his attorney tried to save him and failed. Every detail reminded me that freedom is not given. It is earned. I poured another glass of wine and sat on the edge of my bed. The Calderon was quiet. Peaceful. My empire, my rules. I had built it carefully, meticulously, with patience that only a woman who had spent decades underestimated could muster. Thought about my father. Thomas Hale, the man who had tried to define me, limit me, erase me. The man who believed he could manipulate the law to strip me of my agency. And yet, despite everything, I didn't feel hatred. I felt clarity. For decades he had measured me by the wrong metrics. Marriage, wealth, obedience. He believed a woman alone could never thrive. He was wrong. Alone wasn't weakness. Alone was power. I had spent years honing skills he didn't recognize as valuable. Skills he couldn't see past his own ego to understand. Accounting, finance, legal structures. Tools that weren't flashy, tools that didn't scream success in the way he imagined it should. But tools that gave me control. Tools that gave me freedom. Tools that allowed me to win without firing a single shot. I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents again. Atlas Advisory. Atlas Capital. Atlas Real Estate. Every signature mine. Every contract perfectly aligned. Every investment, every loan, every secured debt orchestrated with precision. He had tried to weaponize my silence. He had tried to define me by what I lacked. A husband, a family, stability. And yet, in trying to destroy me, he had unknowingly handed me the keys to everything he valued most. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Not because I was cruel. Not because I wanted to hurt him. But because finally, after decades of being dismissed, I had what he had always believed was impossible. Control. Control over my life. Control over my legacy. Control over my freedom. I thought about the countless women who had been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Who had been told that ambition was instability, that independence was recklessness. I thought about them and realized something. Strength is not loud. It is quiet. It is deliberate. It is invisible until it arrives at its own pace on its own terms. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent, steady. Below, the streets hummed with life, unaware of the battles fought in the quiet corners of apartments, offices, and courtrooms. I thought about the people who would scroll past my story. The ones who would never know the full depth of the struggle behind every success. And I smiled again. Because some victories are not for the applause. They are for the soul. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the relief, the weight lifting off my shoulders, the decades of expectation finally dissipating. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not to my father, not to the world, not even to myself. I had earned this life through patience, through intellect, through careful planning. Freedom had a price. And I had paid it in silence, in endurance, in unwavering determination. I walked back to my desk and deleted his contact from every device. Not blocked. Not hidden. Deleted. Complete, absolute, irreversible silence. Sometimes I think people believe revenge is about cruelty. But revenge, real revenge, is subtler. It is about reclaiming what was always yours. It is about living on your own terms. And in the quiet aftermath I realized something else. Sometimes the hardest part isn't taking back control. It's knowing you have it finally and carrying it with grace. The world had tried to define me. My father had tried to erase me. And yet here I was. Strong. Independent. Free. I poured the last of my wine into the glass and raised it silently. Not to him, not to anyone. To myself. To the woman they all doubted. To the woman who had quietly rewritten the rules. And in that small, quiet toast, I finally felt the full weight of victory. Not loud. Not public. Not dramatic. Just mine. Silent. Permanent.